Paul's top 5. All right, so here's a quote from Greg Sankey from earlier today on the SEC, saying that 16 strong, or from 14 deep to 16 strong, 16 is our today and our tomorrow. Mentioned the universities, the influence, the collective enrollment, nearly 500 million students, a global network of nearly 5 million alums and former students to set the scene as he talks about 14 deep, which was a great conference, to 16 strong with the additions of today inside Media Day of Texas and Oklahoma.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't say anything about the day after tomorrow or next week. You know, like that's I think, a very good way to put it, because there's nothing officially in the water and there's nothing they can even talk about, which is why the SEC, like, nobody's saying, well, yeah, sure, we'd love to have this, right now. So, but yeah, I mean, they are the premier conference, and the Big Ten technically makes more money per year, when it comes down to their network and all. But the bottom line is that the premier conference in college football is the SEC. They've won the most national titles. They've got the biggest concentration of premier brands in it now because of Texas and Oklahoma. So, I mean, he's not wrong about any of that stuff.
Yeah, 500,000 students, not 500 million. If it was 500 million, then I think their TV ratings would be a lot higher. That'd be
University of China.
Yeah, I guess so. But yeah, 500,000 students, just to be clear, because the other one would be, I don't think anybody could ever possibly catch up to that, and they would be messing with the NFL more so than the Big Ten. But yeah, I think that's just a generic statement by a commissioner whose conference is in the spotlight today. They are 16 strong now. They've been counting that down for 2 years. It's exciting times for them to introduce Oklahoma and Texas and to have them officially a part of their events. 4-day media days. I'm glad we didn't have that last week. I much preferred having 8 teams on both days as opposed to spreading it out and covering nearly an entire work week. But I'm sure they're going to have a lot of fun, and have already started to have a lot of fun in Dallas. And yeah, they're 16 strong. They sat back last week like everybody else and watched the Big 12, peacock around and do their thing, talking about how great they are. And now it's the SEC's turn, and I'm very interested in how the rest of the conferences go about doing that as well. But yeah, this is a big year for Greg Sankey and company, and I think that they are focused on that, even though a lot of the noise in college football seems to be focused on all of these other things that we're inevitably going to be talking about as well. That there's a lot of the outside noise. But for the SEC, hey, they're in a good spot. And so, I know he's got to be, and has been today, a bit more careful with his words and not so much talking about the what-ifs or the futures and things like that, but instead just talking about the present. And you know what? Their present's pretty good because Oklahoma and Texas are in the league now, and this is the start of that.
All right, so there we are with that. And of course, it's something's been building for, since July of 2021 when Texas and Oklahoma announced that they would be joining the SEC. Now, we have made it clear that, the realignment buzz that's always out there, whether innuendos or speculation or whatever, we have a great deal of respect for Jason Scheer from Arizona Wildcat Authority, and I saw this nugget from him. According to sources, there's an internal belief in the Big 12 that Florida State and Clemson are likely to join the conference within the next year or so. Now, that timeline is very wide open. At the same time, I spoke with Jason on the phone because I was like, Jason, what are you hearing here? And he couldn't be on today. His father's having like a heart, not operation, but going to a doctor about his heart. And so I said, we'll get Jason on tomorrow. There's nothing tied up here. There's lawsuits to still be done. But when Jason Scheer put this out, then I kind of double-taked and said, okay, maybe he's hearing some things that are legitimate.
Yeah, I mean, look, we said last week that, here's Florida State and Clemson's plan. Plan A is Big Ten or SEC. That's plan A. That's not on the table yet. Plan B is getting the ESPN to cancel that contract because they broke up the league, and then reforming an ACC that makes more money with less teams in it than there is now. And plan C would be the Big 12, but there are so many factors that go into that to say that anything is close to imminent, and even next year to me means imminent, that Look, they haven't even decided where they're legally going to decide how much money or what rights everybody has yet, because every state that has ruled on it says that, yes, there's jurisdiction in the state for this. So there's 3 different lawsuits going on. They don't know, most importantly, how much they're going to have to pay yet. And nothing can happen until Clemson and Florida State and the ACC come to some sort of agreement on what their overall money is going to be. So outside of those things and many others happening, I just don't see things being imminent. I'm not saying the Big 12 is impossible, but also Florida State and Clemson are doing this to make $80 to $90 million. That is not possible in the Big 12 without a lot of concessions, and they're already going to be paying out fees anyway. So I'm not sure where the Big 12 gets them to 80 to 90 million in a similar time frame that they want to. That's where I get lost.
Yeah, it was very interesting to see him drop that, because you're right, it does make you double take a bit more than some of the other things that are just you can feel is a lot of straw grasping, or just like throw it out, boom, I was right on this. Like there's a lot of noise is my point, and especially when it comes to the realignment phase, and there's all sorts of talk about this Florida State Clemson deal, and there has been now for going on a year, and I think that's going to continue on. And so to see Jason kind of cut through all that, because he is somebody who people obviously hold a different sort of a weight and respect for because of the Arizona reporting, then yeah, that strikes a little bit different than somebody who they do that all the time, and it's like, if it's right, then you hear about it, but if it's wrong, we just move past to the next thing, right? And so he's not one of those guys. He's not somebody that's just throwing stuff out there, whether that's backed by legitimate information or not. It's just, it can get kind of noisy and you don't know what to believe after a while. And so for him to just come out of seemingly nowhere and put that in front of everybody on Twitter was like, whoa, wait a second, what is that about? For sure. It definitely made, I think, everybody pause a little bit. And it's just so interesting, man, because there's definitely this portion of Big 12 fans that are trolling a great deal, like really trolling the hell out of the ACC, much like they did the Pac. And it's just funny to see them actually be given like a little bit of real power, because there's actually other people now, instead of it just being trolling or wish casting or, making up stuff, to troll or whatever, or even believing a little morsel that like, yeah, this could eventually happen. Here comes somebody who gives them like this gift of like real, like potential sourced info. And it's like, man, we might have been kind of talking out of our butt before, but now, like, holy cow, there might really be something to this. And I think that's what happened this weekend, was a bunch of the talk suddenly feels like it was maybe, like confirmed, if you will, or given a boost, because, well, here's this guy who's not just going to say something, like he's saying that it's possible. So now it's taking on this whole new life of like, oh my God, they really are coming. It's not like trolling, this fan base or just hoping that it could happen. It's like, wait, there's actually something to this. And that's the feel I got this weekend. I don't know about you guys, of like this real belief that this is a possibility.
Well,
now.
It is a possibility. It is, because we don't know exactly what's going to happen. But there's so many different A, B, C, D boxes to check. And Jason Scheer, despite being hammered by many who covered the Pac-12 during all that went down in 2022 or 3, stood his ground, told everybody who his sources, not who they were, but stood his ground. He was butchered for it, and in the end, he was completely right.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that he'll be completely right on everything, but I also know that and we know they were the last person, he and his wife, that I said bye to at Media Days the other day. Yeah, that stopped right as we were leaving because I hadn't had a chance to talk to them. So those are the last people I talked to at Allegiant Stadium, and I'm glad I got to say hello, but yeah, he's not throwing it out there for no reason. I think there are people that do, because it's a popular thing to talk about and just speculate on. But like, he's not. Let's just throw speculation out there and just do it recklessly. So I think that's what's super of interest. And again, that's what I think kind of validates what a lot of people are feeling like. Oh, whoa! Like maybe there is something to this more than just a bunch of people on TCU, message boards trolling, because I know that there was a few of those guys. And so on and so forth. So that was kind of my immediate thing. I was like, oh, wow, this takes a turn now simply because he puts that out there. But I do think, much like with the Ross Dellinger interview, John Kurtz did a great job with that, and that got a lot of traction. But if you listen to Ross's, then he was very particular about saying, like, yeah, sure, it's a possible, but he wasn't, like, saying it's happening. He was saying, like, yeah, if this doesn't happen, then sure, there's a possibility that the ACC teams could look at the Big 12. And if you look at Jason's tweet past this one, I was surprised at just how matter-of-fact it was of, like, there's an internal belief that FSU and Clemson are likely to join the conference in the next year or so. I don't doubt that he's hearing that. I don't doubt that he has legit sources. But just to kind of put in a time frame like that, I think also makes it sound a little bit different and adds a little bit of urgency to it. But he also goes on to say in multiple follow-up tweets, this is not imminent. This is not happening right now. There are a lot of things that have to happen to get to this point. But all it does is it gives you that little bit of, like, it's possible. You know, it's not zero. It's maybe 10 or 15, but it's not zero. But there is a long way to go, and he himself is the one that said that.
Yeah, and look, I do think that the process, Florida State and Clemson, and probably North Carolina, and maybe others, will have an opportunity once they know how much they're going to pay to legitimately pitch themselves to the other three conferences, which right now they don't have because the conferences have no idea. Like, if the Big Ten wants to call up Fox and NBC and everybody and say, okay, how much can you add for these schools? And the SEC wants to call up ESPN and go, how much can you add for these schools? And the schools have to get together and find out how much that they have to pay out. Like, they're going to have to find the best deal for them with they're paying hundreds of millions of dollars for several years to the ACC, no matter what happens. So until those things happen and we know a number, I wouldn't say I'm not forecasting them to any league over one over the other, although I would say the Big 12 would be third on their personal choice list.
Just on theirs or yours?
I'll say this. I'll say this definitively. This is the last time I'm going to say it. I don't care where they wind up as long as they win conference titles and get in the playoff. That's all I care about. If they wind up here, it's great for me. I can just
no. As long as you're relevant and you have a chance to win a national title.
I honestly don't care. Yeah. Like, you know, the SEC, Big Ten, whatever. Like, there's pluses and minuses to all of it, and all of them cancel out, in my opinion. But for them, they're not doing this to wind up in the Big 12. They want to be in the SEC because they know if they're in the SEC or the Big 10, then they're going to make $80 to $90 million for sure. They know that. That's what they want. Is that what they're going to get? Well, that's not what everything happens. But I don't think it's really realistic to talk about it until there's a potential bidding process on these two massive media brands.
No, even before then.
Yeah.
Until they know how much they have to pay to get out.
Like until that happens.
Yeah, and I think I said this with John and Ross's interview the other day. I absolutely believe that Florida State and Clemson are talking to the Big 12. I think they're talking to the SEC. I think they're talking to the Big 10. I think every other league or every other conference member in that ACC league that has an opportunity to talk to people outside, I fully believe they're talking. And that's kind of the reports we've heard of, like, the Big 12 is talking with these teams. Yeah, I absolutely believe that. Just like I believe that they were talking to Pac-12 teams, even when people said they weren't doing that. Now, does that mean anything in the long run? No. Does that guarantee they're getting any of those teams? No. But I do think Brett Yormark came out swinging last week. I think them going first set a tone that now, if you're the ACC, you have to talk about this. You probably had to either way, but now you really have to talk about this because he ratcheted things up a bit, right? And now Greg Sankey's getting questions at Media Day about this because what's everybody talking about? Everybody's talking about Brett Yormark last week, and then now what that's led into with Jason Scheer's tweet and just all the noise out there. A lot of that got ramped up last week with Yormark being his typical aggressive self and being open for business, and then everybody kind of following along with those comments and trying to predict the next move. So he was able to stir the pot. I think that was calculated. They can sit back now. Media Day's behind them. Take a deep breath and watch how the next couple of weeks go and who says what and how they approach it. And Greg Sankey said some things today in regards to all this. And I think it was a masterful job of stirring the pot, just like it was when the Pac-12 was going through their issues. Now, does it end up the same? I don't know, but I do feel great about where the Big 12 is going to land ultimately. And whether that's a Florida State Clemson package in 2.5 years from now, or if it's, you know, Vatech and Louisville and, you know, some combination in 4 years from now, either way, I like the Big 12's leadership. I like that they're kind of the aggressor, and I don't believe every single thing that's coming across like this being imminent. But I do think that the more that you kind of keep people out there on their toes and keep them doubting and keep them wondering, that there's areas to make some moves.
Well, also, if you're Brett Yormark, you know the two that are complaining right now and are suing those are the ones that are publicly unhappy. But if your goal is to ultimately just get some of the bigger brands from the ACC, regardless of it wind up being, if FSU and Clemson don't go, but if you get Louisville, if you get Pitt, and you can create those rivalries, if you get Va Tech or something like that, then also worth it in that regard. Because
are any of those teams going to bring in more money?
Well, here's the thing.
question.
Like that's why this is a fun topic, because I know we got other stuff, but like you literally could
do,
go like
but
I know,
okay.
but it's actually fun because you can talk about it for like a million different from a million different standpoints. But yeah, that's the question that nobody takes into account when they start saying like, let's add 6 teams, and it's like, all right, y'all know the Big 12 schools that are in the Big 12 actually want to make money at some point, right? Like they pushed off money this year to welcome in the new 4.
Yep.
So are they just going to keep doing that? And not only that, are they going to do that and then give not just some of their money away to bring in more schools, which they don't have a guarantee they'll ever see back, but they're not just going to give money away. In one instance of this happening, if you really wanted to swing for the fences and let's pretend, which I don't believe that the SEC and Big Ten aren't interested in Florida State and Clemson. I don't believe that. I'm just going to say it right now. I don't believe that. But and you're going to pay them what? Texas, Oklahoma type money to come in? You're going to pay them like double or whatever so that they feel like they're at that mark that they need to be at? So when is everybody else going to make some dadgum money?
No.
Right.
There's absolutely no way that any of the current Big 12 teams, with who they are now, are going to give Florida State and Clemson more of the pie than that they're making.
Right. So that's private.
You just can't do that.
Right. So that's private equity, and that's what that would be. And like, so that's just where I think a lot of the questions are. I trust Jason Shear's reporting. I, for one, am not banking on Florida State and Clemson being in the Big 12 anytime soon. I think there's leveraging. I think there's posturing. I think there's a lot of stuff still up that's just to be determined. I absolutely believe the Big 12 is talking to them and doing everything they possibly can to make that happen. And if that can't happen, they've got a nice option B.
When I asked Brett Yormark last week, are you talking to anyone specifically outside of the Big 12? And he hesitated. Remember?
Right.
He doesn't have to be the one making those calls.
Look, everybody's talking to everybody.
Yeah.
Let's just settle on that. Everybody's talking to everybody. So I absolutely believe conversations going on. But do I believe, based on everything going on right now, that anything is imminent in this regard? No, because there's just too many unanswered questions from the Florida State Clemson side and also from the Big 12 side. So, I mean, it's a very interesting week to head into after all of the noise over the weekend. But like I said, I guess more than anything else, I'm not all in on these moves happening right now, but I do think the Big 12 has set itself up and cast its web, if you will. Yormark's thrown his web out there to potentially, catch some things over time, not necessarily in the next month or, even 6 months, but over time, if they play their cards right, they are in a very good spot, much like we said last week, and who would have ever thought that based on a couple of years ago?
Here's Greg Sankey. He was asked about whether or not he's paying attention to the ACC. I pay attention. We are focused on our 16. I've said before that I'm not a recruiter. I'm not going to entangle the SEC in litigation.
Yeah. So basically he's saying,
I'm not Brett Yormark.
if they're free agents, this is a different story.
Yes.
And where it comes
into, he's not the one who's the recruiter. That doesn't mean they're not calling him.
Yeah. But to Craig's point of, he doesn't believe that the Big Ten and the SEC are not interested in them. That's what you say, so you're not entangled in litigation.
Right.
Because if he came out and was like, yeah, we'd love it. But you're telling me that a guy who just made happen Texas and Texas A&M back again as a rivalry in his league, a giant television number that's going to get.
Oh, yeah.
Texas and Oklahoma, a giant television number in the Big 12 is going to be probably bigger in the SEC, mostly because the television partner will promote it more. Not because the game has changed in any way, shape, or form. It's still what it was. That you couldn't get Clemson and South Carolina, which is a bitter rivalry, even though lopsided, and Florida State, which is one of the top 10 in the country in your league, and you're not interested in that number?
You have arguably the best rivalries other than like Michigan, Ohio State, basically in your cupboard. If you were to add like Florida State to that mix, and you just added Oklahoma and Texas, and I know there's probably a couple that I'm not thinking about. I'm not, doing it intentionally. Just in general, I can't believe you wouldn't want to fill your cupboard with more goodies like that. Oh, we already have this type of treat. Well, wouldn't you like the one with mint in it, or caramel or whatever? Like that's. I hear all this, well, there's not really an appetite for it. I don't think there's an appetite for it because it's not time for them to say they're hungry. It's not dinner time for the SEC yet. They don't have to be proactive. They can sit back and just let this unfold and let the litigation and all of that happen. They don't have to do a Brett Yormark and try to cut to the front of the line or create any sort of disturbances. They know who they are and where their power lies. And so, yeah, I don't believe that Greg Sankey has the ability to say much today. And so that's vague, and I would only expect vague in that regard. But if the time were to come where he could actually speak more openly or the opportunities are really there, I think he would sing a different tune. I absolutely do.
All right, we got that's a great discussion, because when Jason Scheer popped it out there, I knew we had to get into it. Let's get into a couple other things. This is breaking news on Jeff Tedford, the head coach at Fresno State, announcing that he's resigning. He is no longer the head coach at Fresno State. He has announced his retirement or his resignation. This is like right up until the time that the season is about to start, and allow someone else to lead the program. This is very late in the mix. Now, I don't know about whether or not there's any kind of health issues or whatever, which is what he said. But at the same time, he's got to take care of himself and his family. Fresno State has to find a replacement.
Well, it's absolutely health issues. That's exactly what he cited. He said, with sad emotions following my recent medical checkup, it is clear that due to health concerns, my family and I have made the decision to step aside as Fresno State's head coach and allow someone else to lead the football program. So he was back for a second go-round, about to enter year 3 of the part 2 at Fresno State. And he was, in this position back in 2019 where he had to step down due to health reasons. So, yeah, awfully close to the season kicking off. Yeah, that's just tough. I hope he's okay. But obviously it's very scary when you got to step away from a job and you haven't done it just one time. This wasn't like, this was your first rodeo. It's like you've had to do this before. So, yeah, he came back, and y'all knew who he replaced, right? Kalen DeBoer at Fresno State, who's had a little journey since these last couple of years, over these last couple of years. But really great coach. Hate when things are out of people's control like this. So hopefully he's able to rest up and stay healthy, get healthy, whatever the case may be. But yeah, very abrupt and sad news there for Jeff Tedford and for Fresno State.
All right, here's a couple of other stories from the SEC. We do have a couple of back-to-back guests with Matt Brown and then also Carter Yates in this next couple of segments. But Nick Saban, here's Nick Saban when asked about Big 12 and Texas and Oklahoma, specifically Texas.
That's always the challenge in the SEC. What kind of tickles me is all these people asking these questions about how Texas always ran the conference they were in. They're not going to run the SEC. There's a whole lot of arrogant people in a lot of places in the SEC, so they can forget all about that. They'll be a good team and a great program, and Stark will do a great job, but that's not going to be a problem.
All right, the fact that there are still people who feel like Texas ran the Big 12 is one thing. We know the power.
I think there's two ways of looking at that. Ran as in on the field, ran as in off the field.
No, off the
and
field,
I think people are
doubt.
talking about off the field, not on the field. Yeah.
And so Saban with that response, who just lost to Texas back in September of a year ago.
I sure hope that's the case, though. I sure hope that when they try to, make a move, because they inevitably will, and that's a credit to them. That's not a diss or a knock in any way. It's a credit to how they can scheme and find themselves making moves. And, that's something that I don't know what would really be out there for them at this point, like what power grab they could have. So maybe there's nothing. Maybe it's just quiet for a while. But I do hope if they try to pull some of the throw your weight around type moves that there is a response that is heavy from an Alabama, Georgia, Florida contingent of teams. We'll see, though, because we've seen how it works with the Nebraska, Oklahoma, A&M, Missouri, if you want to throw them in there. We know how that worked over time. I know the SEC's better ran and on a much different foundation, but I do hope that there is pushback, and I expect that there will be.
All right. You would think so. If it's best for the conference, then everybody should do it. Nick Saban was denied today getting into what was basically Radio Row and where they have the television setups, just no different than what we saw in Vegas. There's a lot more people there. He's now a media member, denied access into what was the area where you have to have a credential because he's never had to have a credential. So now that's reality. Nick Saban kind of laughed about it. Greg Sankey brought it up in his opening comments too.
Media, man, you gotta do. It's some of the media rules are you gotta have it's your press pass. I made the mistake last year of just. We had too much of a butting up of our pregame show and kickoff time where like that 30 minutes doesn't really allow you to do much, even though it's a mile away. So I'm walking in at kickoff now every single time. And last year, pouring down rain. Had no umbrella. That's my bad for not planning right. And soaking wet, got all the way to like the mile walk that it takes once you park your car, only to dump my soaking wet bag on the metal detector table and then have to go, where's your credential? And just, and had to walk all the way back in the soaking rain. I mean, I didn't have a dry part on my body. But, yeah, you got to have your credential, man. And you know what? I'm glad they stopped me because if they said, hey, we know you, come on in, it would make me wonder of, like, you know, in other situations, you let that person through. So, yeah, you got to have your credential even if you're Nick Saban.
Yeah, I've had it where I forgot it, and they gave me a temporary, like Brent Ingram or whoever it was, but I've never been able to get in without the credential no longer how long we've been covering Baylor.
Makes me feel better about us not getting credentialed. At least they just wouldn't let Nick Saban walk in.
Yeah.
I don't know. After last week, I'm kind of glad we're not there, man. That turnaround would have been hell, baby.
I wouldn't have minded a couple of days, though, on Wednesday and Thursday.
I probably wouldn't have wanted to do 4 days.